When the war ended, the continent was left covered in visible scars, and others deliberately buried. Some hid what they carried, others sealed off structures, and many remains were left underground, untouched by anyone. What is hidden does not follow a single logic. Sometimes it was fear, other times urgency. In several cases, what was no longer useful was left behind. Over the years, the land, water, or cement covered what had been hidden, but everything that is buried eventually comes out. From a hat with a story to a sunken airplane, the pieces have begun to reappear. And each one, small or large, carries questions, dates, and names forgotten for decades. If the war ended so long ago and the entire world counted its dead, why are there still things that remain silent beneath the ground? The Frankenstein treasure. In May of 2017, a 14-year-old Polish teenager named Patrick Lesman went on an excursion with his family near Lake Jeziorak in northeastern Poland. While walking by the water, he stumbled upon something metallic that was slightly protruding from the ground. He began digging with his hands until the rusted lid of an old metal milk can appeared. Soon he found a second one. What looked like simple rural containers were hiding inside them an intact collection of personal belongings belonging to one of the oldest Prussian aristocratic families in the region, the von Frankenstein. The two milk cans contained a surprising collection of keepsakes, all hidden in evident haste during the final months of the Second World War. Among them were official documents, letters on family letterhead, black and white photographs, a fountain pen, a pair of eyeglasses, a diary with entries dated from 1914, a silver spoon, a military badge, a pocket watch, several old coins, and even a carefully folded Wehrmacht officer's uniform. There was also a toothbrush with a bone handle, a shaving kit, a handful of banknotes and decorative medals, along with a series of everyday items such as hunting accessories, pieces of jewelry, and personal containers. Everything was in an astonishing state of preservation after more than 70 years underground. After the discovery, the young man's parents contacted the authorities, and soon experts from the Ilawa Museum confirmed the origin. The items had belonged to Count Hans Joachim von Frankenstein, last owner of a manor estate by the lake before the Soviet advance in 1945. For decades, the whereabouts of the Count and his belongings had remained in the shadows. The appearance of the milk cans reopened a family history that had been buried with the retreat of the Third Reich. The contents of the containers were inventoried and preserved for more than a year by a team of archaeologists and historians. The Count's diary, written between the First World War and the final years of Nazism, provided invaluable details about the life of the German nobility in East Prussia, their ties to the military, and their view of the conflict. Two documents in Cyrillic script were also found, dated January and February of 1945, precisely during the days of the Red Army's advance through the region. Subsequent research revealed that the Count remained on his property until March of 1945, when he was detained by Soviet troops and taken to a prisoner camp in the town of Paswenk. He died shortly thereafter in custody. His wife, Hildegarda, managed to survive as a forced laborer on her own estate for several months. In November of that same year, she was freed and succeeded in reuniting with her daughters in Germany. According to the researchers, everything indicates that it was she who decided to bury the family's belongings before the arrival of the Russian troops, trying to protect the little that still belonged to them. The Count's daughter, Waltraud von Frankenstein, was 81 years old when she was contacted after the discovery. She had been living in Germany for decades and immediately recognized several of the items that had been part of her childhood. The letters, photographs, and personal objects had remained underground almost the entire time she had spent away from her original home. Thanks to the museum's efforts, some of the items were returned to her, while the rest remained in the hands of the Polish state treasury and were allocated to public exhibitions in Ilawa and Ostroda. One of the details that most caught the attention of the experts was a note signed by a Soviet officer addressed to the soldiers who occupied the estate. It read, "Comrades, please respect the inhabitants of this house. They have received us with dignity." However, just a few days later, another certificate written by the occupiers stated that all livestock, horses, poultry, and agricultural goods of the family were to become property of the Red Army. Hoping to find more related objects, the researchers conducted further searches in the area using metal detectors. although they did not find more belongings of the von Frankenstein family. Within the same perimeter, a medieval period battle axe and remains of an old fortification were discovered. These findings were delivered by regional historian Michael Mortek to the Ostroda Museum as part of the preservation of local heritage. The case was widely covered in Polish and European media, not only because of the historical value of the milk can's contents, but also due to the deeply human nature of the discovery. A noble family, forced to abandon their land, had entrusted their legacy to a pair of metal containers buried on the shores of a lake. More than 7 decades later, a teenager on vacation allowed that story to return to light. The find not only contributed unique documents about the twilight of the Prussian aristocracy, but also a time capsule filled with personal memories that managed to return to the hands of the Count's descendants, completing a circle interrupted by the war. Hitler's war school buried beneath Berlin. A group of Berlin war tunnel experts reported the discovery of an old Nazi military school buried under an artificial hill to the west of the city. The training center, which was the brainchild of Nazi architect Albert Speer, is located on Teufelsberg, a 116-meter elevation made from approximately 26 million cubic meters of rubble from buildings destroyed during the war. The structure, which was never completed, began when Adolf Hitler laid its cornerstone in 1937. The plan was for it to be part of the massive Reich capital city called Germania, but according to an internal Nazi memo, the challenges brought on by the conflict forced construction to halt just 3 years later. The British troops who took over the area considered using the site as their headquarters, but found it too complicated to adapt. They were also unable to demolish it, as it was too heavily reinforced. So they decided to cover it with half of Berlin's war debris, the equivalent of around 400,000 buildings, and scattered grass seeds on top. This is how Teufelsberg was formed. Over time, Berliners used it for skiing and sledding in the winter, and for flying kites in the summer. Almost everyone completely forgot that there was a military school beneath, except for a few curious individuals. It was the Berlin Underworlds Association that came across old documents indicating the exact location. "We're sure that much of the building is still down there, even though they tried to blow it up," said Dietmar Arnold from the Underworlds group. This organization, which has located 50 shelters in 10 years, wants to begin digging as soon as possible. "We know that beneath that area there's also a huge multi-level tunnel system. The plan is to excavate about 20 meters in the northeastern part using a machine until they reach the concrete and brick, and then allow explorers to enter using ropes and helmets." Berlin newspapers described the project as the attempt to uncover the last great secret of underground Berlin. Berliners' interest in hidden shelters and wartime structures appears to be unending. The most famous of all, the bunker from which Hitler, already out of his mind, tried to manage the final days of the conflict, was recreated entirely in a digital animation, including every doorknob and window frame. Several historians praised the virtual tour of the place, which was based on government security archives from the 1970s, as the best digital replica of that bunker in existence. The real site, located near Potsdamer Platz, was covered with earth and sealed once again. The model's creator, designer Christoph Neugebauer, explained that, contrary to popular belief, Hitler did not spend his final days in a modern underground luxury hideout, but in a rather basic shelter intended for public employees. The lost drone of the Second World War that returned with the tide. An old piece once used by the military during the Second World War unexpectedly appeared on the coast of Massachusetts. The alert was issued by the Cape Cod National Seashore Team after a human-made object was found stranded in the sand at Marconi Beach. The discovery was shared on social media by the park itself on Wednesday, the 10th of April of 2024. The image showed a structure worn down by time, resting on the beach just before a storm could drag it back into the sea. The park staff quickly organized to rescue the piece before the waves could carry it away. After moving it to a safe location, the park's historian, Bill Burke, examined it in detail. He confirmed that it was the fuselage of an RCAT, a type of unmanned aircraft used as a target drone in the 1940s and 50s. The RCAT, short for Remote Controlled Aerial Target, was forcefully launched from a plane, accelerating from 0 to nearly 100 kilometers per hour in just 10 meters. It was then guided from the ground to simulate a real aerial threat during anti-aircraft artillery exercises. The drone had been part of training exercises held off the coast, specifically at the former military field in Wellfleet. That base operated between 1943 and 1961, occupying more than 1,700 hectares along the Atlantic. During that period, it served as a key center for preparing anti-aircraft defense units. Today, that area functions as a public park, frequented by those looking to relax, surf, fish, hike, or simply spend the day. However, beneath its surface remain remnants of war, and authorities remind visitors that unexploded ordnance may still exist. According to the park team, the RCATs launched from a runway now overgrown with vegetation in Wellfleet were released from a mother plane and guided remotely from a cliff. The fuselage found, buried for decades beneath the sand, still bore clear signs of its origin. It was recovered without major damage, which made its identification easier. The area has already revealed other fragments of its military past. Though decommissioned over 60 years ago, its history continues to emerge. The aircraft was moved to a protected area to be preserved. Although it had been exposed, its overall condition allowed it to be clearly identified. Its design and purpose made it a vital tool during the wartime targeting exercises. During that period, the aerial threat was among the most feared. Training with flying targets was essential to prepare soldiers for real attacks. The use of drones of this kind made it possible to simulate fast movements and evasive maneuvers that an enemy aircraft might have executed. The discovery also drew attention to the wartime remnants still hidden in coastal areas. Although many were removed or detonated after the war, others remain underground, concealed among dunes or buried over time. Authorities reminded visitors that even today, old munitions or explosives may still be found in the area. For this reason, caution is advised for anyone visiting the site, and any suspicious object should be reported immediately. The discovery of the RCAT is part of a long list of war relics that the sea has returned in different parts of the world. But in this case, the object emerged in the very area where 80 years ago, soldiers trained for a global conflict. These types of drones carried no crew and were not used for attacks. Their sole purpose was to serve as targets. They were key components in the development of unmanned warfare technology. Their radio control system, rudimentary by today's standards, was an early step toward what would decades later become remotely operated aerial vehicles for combat purposes. The Wellfleet field was one of the most active sites for such trials. Its coastal location allowed for safe training over the sea. From there, many units learned to fire at moving targets that simulated enemy planes. The fuselage found was likely buried by wind, sand, and tides for more than 70 years. The fact that it surfaced without breaking makes it a unique witness to the technology used during the war to prepare anti-aircraft defenses. Although the park today is dedicated to leisure and recreation, episodes like this one serve as a reminder that its lands were once part of an active military history. The appearance of this piece was not only surprising due to its condition, but also because of what it represents: an intact fragment of a 20th century military experiment returned without warning by the sea. The discovery was documented by the park team and will be preserved as a historical piece. No other visible fragments have been detected, but authorities do not rule out the possibility that more remains may appear with future storms or ground shifts. The beaches of Cape Cod have witnessed many transformations, but this revelation allowed a brief glimpse into a time when the waves accompanied war tests rather than peaceful summer strolls. The forgotten SS bunker, discovered with weapons, tableware, and war paintings. In the summer of 1990, while preparations were underway for an open-air concert celebrating the fall of the Berlin Wall, a security team was inspecting the grounds of the former Death Strip, the empty stretch where the wall had stood for decades. During that inspection, the personnel made an unexpected discovery: the reinforced roof of a Nazi bunker, buried underground since the final days of the war. The site was not marked on any maps. No one had reported its existence, and upon opening it, it became clear that it had been sealed since 1945. It was not a simple shelter. It was a facility built for Adolf Hitler's drivers and personal guards, members of the SS escort unit. When the technicians entered, they found the place just as its occupants had left it. On the walls hung hand-painted patriotic murals depicting SS soldiers fighting to defend women and the homeland. On the tables were metal cutlery and dishware bearing inscriptions. There was also old weaponry, intact and never removed. The discovery caused alarm. It was a space frozen in time. Not only were the original items present, but their preservation was so precise it looked as if the place had just been vacated. the murals did not depict defeat or ruin, but instead glorified the SS fighters. The site was immediately sealed. The local government feared that opening it to the public could turn it into a gathering point for neo-Nazi groups. However, in 1992, Alfred Kerndl, director of Berlin archaeology, gained access to conduct a full inventory of the contents. He documented everything with photographs and notes, from the military elements to the decorative and kitchen items. Kerndl proposed preserving the bunker exactly as it was. He argued that its value did not lie in glorifying anything, but in showing how even the lower ranks of the regime had access to symbols of power, comfort, and propaganda. To him, the murals painted on the walls revealed more arrogance and kitsch than grandeur. The reaction was immediate. Various organizations opposed any attempt to exhibit the site. They argued that, even if it wasn't Hitler's bunker, it risked becoming a shrine for extremists. The rejection was unequivocal. The National Historical Museum also refused to preserve the murals or the discovered items. No institution wanted to associate itself with the proposal. Eventually, the Berlin Senate ordered the bunker to be resealed. Everything was buried again, sealed beneath the ground, in the same area where office buildings and government structures would later be constructed. The site was never opened to the public. The discovery confirmed something many urban archaeologists had long suspected. Beneath Berlin's political center still lie dozens of underground structures built by the Nazi regime. Some have already been located, while others remain unidentified. It is estimated that in the area near Hitler's former bunker, at least 20 interconnected shelters and tunnels were constructed. The case of the driver's bunker was different from others because of its state of preservation. Unlike the Führer bunker, which was partially destroyed and filled with rubble, this structure had been ignored for decades, allowing its interior to remain untouched. Its contents functioned as a time capsule. The decision to keep it sealed was not purely political. Authorities also considered the psychological impact that opening it could have. Displaying scenes that glorify the SS, even in a critical context, could provoke unpredictable reactions. Added to this was the lack of a clear approach on how to deal with material remnants of the regime without risking glorification or trivialization. For Kerndl, hiding the site only fueled the mystery. His proposal aimed to expose it under controlled curatorship, with guides trained in anti-fascist pedagogy, as had already been done at other memorial sites. He argued that concealing the remains did not make them disappear, and that by ignoring them, room was left for mythology and speculation. Despite his position, the site was once again closed. It was covered with soil and integrated into the land later designated for official projects. Today, no one can access that structure, and there is no signage indicating what once stood there. This bunker was an exception. While other remnants of the Third Reich have been turned into museums, such as the Wolf's Lair in Poland or the bunkers in Zossen and Marienthal, that option was dismissed in Berlin. The German political center did not want to bear the weight of such a symbolically sensitive space, even though its historical and documentary value was undeniable. The lethal U.S. submarine that reappeared intact 80 years later. In May of 2024, a specialized team confirmed the discovery of the USS Harder, one of the most feared submarines by the Japanese Empire during the Second World War. The hull of this vessel, sunk in 1944, was located more than 900 meters beneath the surface of the South China Sea. The discovery was made by the Lost 52 Project, an initiative dedicated to locating the 52 American submarines that disappeared during the conflict. The official confirmation came from the United States Naval History and Heritage Command, known as NHHC. After verifying the data provided by the project's researchers, it was declared without any doubt that the submarine found was the USS Harder. The vessel lay almost entirely intact on the seafloor, with the only visible damage located on its conning tower. The find was made possible through cutting-edge exploration technology. The Lost 52 team, led by marine explorer Tim Taylor and specialist Christine Dennison, used underwater drones and photogrammetry techniques to precisely map the wreckage. From thousands of images taken from different angles, a three-dimensional reconstruction of the submarine was created. The images revealed details such as the hull, propellers, bridge, and periscope tower. The clarity of the visual data enabled Navy experts to confirm with complete certainty that the vessel was the USS Harder. This submarine entered service in 1943. From its first mission, it operated in the Pacific with a clear objective: to sink enemy ships. Aboard were 79 crew members under the command of Commander Samuel Dealey. Its combat motto was simple: hit them harder. On every patrol, it lived up to that principle to the letter. The USS Harder completed 6 deployments before disappearing. During its 5th patrol, it managed to sink 3 Japanese destroyers and seriously damage 2 others. That operation was one of the boldest in US submarine warfare. The Japanese High Command ordered that it be stopped at all costs. Its mere presence forced enemy convoys to alter routes and strategies. The last time it was heard from was on the 24th of August, 1944. It was operating in waters near Dassault Bay, north of the Philippines. There, in the company of the USS Hake, it approached a Japanese naval formation. During the maneuver, the Harder launched 3 torpedoes at enemy targets. Immediately afterward, it was hit by a series of depth charges. The USS Hake managed to retreat, but the Harder never re-established communication. For decades, its location remained unknown. Several attempts to trace it yielded no results. The depth of the sea and the lack of exact coordinates made the task difficult. The recovery of this vessel marked a milestone for the Lost 52 team. It was the 7th submarine identified by the project since its inception. The exact location of the discovery remains undisclosed out of respect for the families of the fallen sailors. According to the team's protocol, no discovery is announced until a full verification has been completed. Once confirmed, the finding is officially recorded and designated as a commemorative site. Commander Samuel Dealey, who led the Harder, was one of the most decorated commanders of the war. His bravery earned him multiple posthumous honors. Under his leadership, the submarine amassed sinking records in a very short span. The loss of the vessel was considered a strategic blow to the US Navy, despite its prior achievements. The discovery also reflects the advancement of deep-sea search techniques. Thanks to the use of autonomous drones and photographic scanning, the possibilities of locating sunken vessels with millimetric precision have greatly expanded. The images captured of the Harder reveal its strong structural condition, despite being underwater for 80 years. The find allowed researchers to observe details such as the torpedo system, hatches, and internal hull structures. Fragments of original paint and engraved serial numbers were even identified. All of this was key to verifying the vessel's authenticity. The director of the NHHC, retired Admiral Samuel Cox, stated that the Harder was sunk in the midst of victory. According to him, the tactics employed by the crew were extraordinarily aggressive and effective. That offensive approach was precisely what made the submarine a top priority target for the enemy. The Lost 52 project is part of a broader initiative focused on recovering information about submarine warfare. Funded through private contributions and supported institutionally with logistics, the program is expected to continue for several more years. To date, it has uncovered wrecks in various parts of the Pacific and Atlantic, helping to close unresolved chapters in US military history. The discovery of the USS Harder in the South China Sea adds to a growing list of underwater findings. Its recovery, beyond its technical value, holds symbolic meaning for the crew's families. Although the vessel will not be extracted, its location has been secured and thoroughly documented. The seafloor thus becomes its final resting place. What the park was hiding, German Second World War bunkers found underground in Belgium. In April of 2024, while a conservation team was clearing a coastal park in Heist aan Zee, Belgium, the intact remains of a forgotten Nazi military complex from 1945 emerged beneath the sand. Just a few centimeters below the soil and roots, 3 reinforced concrete bunkers, 2 brick trenches, a military concrete path, and the remains of everyday objects came to light, all in the same location where German soldiers had built a fortification during the Second World War. The discovery site was Director General Willemspark, a small dune area in the Flemish region of Flanders. The project aimed to remove invasive plants to restore the natural ecosystem. But as soon as the first excavators began working, fragments of concrete, bricks, and rusted elements appeared that didn't match the landscape. As the work progressed, the ground revealed what had been hidden for over 80 years. Military structures built by the German army in 1942. The area already had history. During the First World War, the site had seen combat and was home to 2 German artillery batteries, Freya and Augusta. With barriers, shelters, and bunkers, the location served as a strategic point to control the coast. After the war, many of those installations were demolished or buried. But 20 years later, in the midst of the Second World War, the Nazi regime once again turned the park into a fortified base. During its military reconstruction, the area was covered with more than 60 structures. Ammunition depots, personnel shelters, concrete roads for troop transport and defensive trenches were built, all with the intent of resisting potential attacks from the sea. At the end of the conflict, many of these constructions were deliberately concealed. The more fragile ones were destroyed and turned into rubble. The more resilient ones were covered with soil. The April 2024 discovery included 3 intact bunkers. Each was an enclosed room with a reinforced concrete roof, no windows, a single entrance, and completely buried by sand. The walls of these military shelters remained solid. They were built using the same technique applied to other fortifications along the Atlantic Wall. Alongside them, 2 zigzag-shaped brick trenches were uncovered. Fragments of a concrete path also emerged, likely used by vehicles and soldiers. A water well built by the Germans still retained its structure. Among the remains, kitchen utensils, spent ammunition cartridges, and rusted tools were also found. Archaeologists supervised every meter of excavation. According to heritage authorities, everything was recorded, documented, and photographed. But once the investigation was complete, the discovered elements were recovered with sand to ensure their preservation. The ground was sealed, unmarked, just as it had been for decades. Local authorities explained that the park had been the subject of several efforts to erase its military past. Constructions were destroyed, areas were filled in with rubble, and vegetation was planted over the ruins. Despite those efforts, the heavier remnants remained beneath the surface. And now, after so many years, they have become visible once again. For generations, the residents of Heist an See lived with rumors of hidden structures beneath their feet, but the full extent was unknown. Some neighbors had previously pointed out areas of the park where the ground sounded hollow or where roots did not grow normally. Authorities never conducted an in-depth investigation. The constructions now rediscovered offer a direct glimpse into the German occupation of Belgium. They are not isolated remnants. They are part of a coastal defense system that stretched from northern France to Denmark. In many cases, these shelters followed similar patterns, with thick walls, curved ceilings, reinforced entrances, and narrow spaces designed for protection against bombings. The discovery did not include any First World War structures. Although the area was key in that conflict, the traces of the early fortifications were destroyed or dismantled in the following decades. Only the elements from the Second World War remained hidden, protected by layers of soil and vegetation. Heritage experts clarified that the fact the remains were reburied does not diminish their historical value. They explained that covering them with sand helps preserve their integrity and prevents degradation caused by air, rain, or foot traffic. The park will continue to function as a natural area, but now with the awareness that beneath the ground lie structures that were once part of the Nazi war machine. Authorities also left open the possibility that more military remnants may exist under the park. The scanned area represents only a portion of the entire terrain. The density of constructions in 1942 suggests that other facilities may still be buried. For now, the park has regained its natural appearance, but it holds within it a history of concrete, trenches, and war. The chest buried by Japanese soldiers who left their final words before dying. In the year 2017, a group of workers preparing the ground for a construction project in a coastal area of Okinawa came across a metallic object about 50 centimeters underground. It was a rectangular container covered in rust but still sealed. They initially thought it was some kind of old tool until one of them noticed Japanese characters engraved on the top. They decided to notify the local authorities, and a team of archaeologists took charge of the contents. The box was opened at a specialized facility under controlled conditions. Inside were several envelopes wrapped in traditional paper, along with some personal items, medals, portraits, fabric scraps with names written on them, and a small Japanese flag with handwritten notes. Everything was well preserved. Experts confirmed that it was a time capsule left at the end of the Second World War. The papers dated back to 1945 and were written by members of the Japanese army stationed in Okinawa during the final months of the conflict. Many of the texts were messages addressed to their families, friends, or people of the future. They spoke about the weather, the battles they anticipated, their thoughts, and their hope that those lines might one day be read. These were not official messages. They were personal texts made independently, some hastily written, others more orderly. Some included drawings, short phrases, or simple verses. One read, "If someone finds this, understand that we acted according to our beliefs. Remember that we too felt fear." Another said, "My name is Taro. I am 19 years old. I'm leaving this because I don't know if I will see another day." The discovery drew attention for the raw honesty of its content. It was not propaganda, nor official reports, nor orders. It was thought. Researchers translated everything into modern Japanese and digitized the content. They then began contacting institutions that preserve war records to try to identify the names. The identities of 9 individuals were confirmed. Some died in combat, others went missing during the battles in Okinawa. Only one was found alive. He was living in Tokyo and was already over 90 years old. When informed of the discovery, he asked to see the box. He recognized his handwriting on one of the papers and confirmed that the group had decided to bury it before receiving orders to move out. The container had been hidden beneath a slab in what had once served as a shelter used by the soldiers as a meeting point. According to the veteran, at that moment they knew the army's fall was imminent and wanted to leave a record of what they were feeling. None of them wanted their thoughts to vanish without a trace. The discovery was recorded as one of the most moving finds related to that episode. It provided no military intelligence or secret information, but it did offer a direct glimpse into how those days were lived by those at the very bottom of the ranks, without filters or official revisions. A temporary exhibit was organized at a local museum in Okinawa, where copies of the writings were displayed along with the items found in the box. A video was also included, featuring testimony from the only surviving soldier identified, which helped contextualize the contents. The public response was considerable, especially among young people who had never heard of such time capsules. The messages made it clear that the writers were aware of what was coming. Some even spoke of their plans if they made it home. One wrote that his dream was to open a rice shop. Another said he wanted to marry a girl from his neighborhood. These were simple plans, kept alongside a conflict that was destroying everything. Beyond its archaeological value, the box's contents revealed a less visible side of the war, not that of commanders or massive battles, but that of young conscripts who wrote a few lines so as not to be forgotten. Frank Moody's Sunken Plane, Recovery in the Waters of Lake Huron. A group of divers spent several years exploring the icy depths of Lake Huron off the coast of the state of Michigan. Their goal was to recover the remains of a military aircraft that crashed in 1944. The pilot was Lieutenant Frank Moody, a member of the combat squadron made up exclusively of African-American aviators known as the Tuskegee Airmen. The crash site was located about 90 kilometers northeast of Detroit near Port Huron. The downed aircraft was a Bell P-39 Airacobra, which had been used during training exercises in the midst of the war. The fuselage remained submerged for nearly 80 years until it was finally located in 2014. During the dives, the recovery team managed to extract the bullet-riddled propeller, a collection of disintegrated components, and more recently, the engine of the aircraft, which weighed around 540 kilograms. That main component was found about 9 meters below the surface, embedded in sediment and covered by mollusks. The discovery was made possible through the joint work of the National Museum of the Great Lakes and the Tuskegee Airmen National Historical Museum, located at the Coleman Young Airport in Detroit. The plan is to preserve all the recovered parts and display them at that same location as part of a permanent exhibit on the history of the squadron. The recovery of the engine marks one of the project's milestones. Upon being brought to the surface, it was immediately submerged in a chemical solution to halt its deterioration and begin the restoration process. According to the lead conservator, its state of preservation is exceptional, as the aircraft crashed in shallow, fresh water, which helped preserve the metal more effectively. Initial clues about the accident point to a malfunction in the synchronization of the weaponry. On the 11th of April 1944, the 22-year-old pilot performed a firing maneuver while flying over the lake. The bullets struck the propeller directly, destabilizing the aircraft and sending it into a nosedive. His body was found months later on the shore. Although his death was recorded, the wreckage of the aircraft remained scattered across the lake bed, unrecovered for several decades. In 2018, the state officially authorized archaeological recovery efforts. Since then, components such as the tail, cockpit gauges, ammunition, auxiliary engines, and part of the landing gear have been retrieved. The maritime archaeologist in charge, Wayne Lusardi, confirmed that the plane was completely fragmented, with pieces spread across a stretch of more than 800 meters. The lakebed conditions allowed many components to remain in good condition, which will aid in their restoration. Even so, much of the aircraft remains underwater. Each find has been meticulously mapped to document its precise location. This information will be used in future reconstruction and exhibition work. The operations are carried out by specialized underwater recovery diving teams following historical conservation protocols approved by the state's Department of Natural Resources. Beyond its archaeological value, the discovery holds deep symbolic significance. Frank Moody was one of 15 squadron members who died in Michigan during training sessions. Of that group, 5 lost their lives in Lake Huron and 1 more in the St. Clair River. All of them were part of the segregated contingent that fought for the United States amid racial discrimination. In 2021, a commemorative monument was unveiled in honor of those aviators. It is located near the Blue Water International Bridge in Port Huron. Its purpose is to honor their sacrifices and bring visibility to their role during the war. The director of the Detroit Museum explained that the long-term goal is to raise funds to build a new facility where complete aircraft and other items linked to the Tuskegee Airmen's legacy can be displayed. The P-39 engine will be a central piece in that historical journey. During the Second World War, these pilots were sent on combat missions in Europe. Their unit earned respect for its skill and effectiveness in the air, despite the constraints imposed by segregation. They first trained in Alabama, but Michigan was one of the states used for advanced instruction. The discovery of the aircraft completes a lesser-known narrative of their history, the losses suffered on U.S. soil during training. To date, it is estimated that at least 3 more aircraft connected to this unit lie at the bottom of Lake Huron, according to the group Diving with a Purpose, which is dedicated to African American maritime history. Recovery efforts will continue as long as weather permits. The team hopes to extract more structural fragments in the coming years. Each piece will be restored and documented as part of an effort to reconstruct the events surrounding the tragedy. Once the process is complete, the museum will present an exhibit tracing the journey from training in Michigan to their combat impact abroad. It will also include testimonies, uniforms, and photographs of the squadron. It will be the first comprehensive display about their time in the state and the sacrifices made beyond the battlefield. The buried concrete monster in France. In the Epelex forest in northern France near Saint-Omer, Allied troops discovered in 1944 a gigantic concrete structure that did not appear on any maps. Advancing through bomb craters, they came upon a semi-buried building with walls more than 7 meters thick. They had reached the blockhouse d'Eperlec, a Nazi base designed to launch dozens of V-2 missiles per day, though it never fired a single one. The facility had been conceived to house more than 100 rockets at a time. Its objective, to launch up to 36 missiles daily against southern England. The complex included a liquid oxygen production plant, essential for powering the engines, and a reinforced railway station that connected with Germany to transport weapons and supplies. The project was named the Northwest Power Plant. Construction began in March of 1943 by direct orders from Albert Speer. Hitler had approved the design, based on submarine bunker structures. The plan was to build a fixed launch platform, resistant to bombings and capable of assembling missiles vertically, like an underground production line. Its dimensions exceeded any other structure of its kind at the time. The roof, 5 meters thick, was built at ground level and then lifted using hydraulic jacks while the walls were completed below. The aim was to create an explosion-proof air raid cavern. Inside, 5 Hylant compressors could produce 10 tons of liquid oxygen daily, with tanks designed to store up to 150 tons. The project was assigned to the Todt organization and executed by the company Holtzman and Polanski. Construction Battalion No. 434 began work that same month with 6,000 laborers. There were German and French technicians forced to participate, along with thousands of prisoners of war and civilians from Poland, Czechoslovakia, Belgium, and Spain. Many were political prisoners, confined in nearby camps and guarded by collaborators and Soviet soldiers used as sentries. Escape attempts occurred despite immediate executions as punishment. Shifts lasted 12 hours, under floodlights that operated through the night without interruption. Concrete was mixed continuously and transported by train from a river port on the AA River. From the north, a 90,000-volt electrical network supplied power. To the south, a quarry in Wissens served as a storage and technical support hub. From the air, the construction began to raise suspicions. In May of 1943, RAF reconnaissance flights detected unusual movements and irregular structures. Though intelligence services still didn't know exactly what was being built, its scale was alarming. On the 6th of August, a British military committee ordered it to be attacked immediately. The first bombing took place on the 27th of August. 187 aircraft dropped over 300 bombs on the freshly poured concrete block. The damage was severe. The concrete hardened chaotically, trapping scaffolding and rendering much of the building unusable. Hundreds of forced labourers died. The scheduled shift changes, intended to minimize casualties, were not enough to reduce the toll. The attacks continued for weeks. Eventually, German commanders abandoned the plan to use it as a launch platform. The southern section was repurposed into a liquid oxygen production plant. To protect it, they accelerated construction of the roof from top to bottom, but the accumulated damage prevented significant progress. At the same time, they began another similar facility, called La Coupole, just a few kilometers to the south. On the 4th of July 1944, the project was officially suspended. A few days later, tallboy bombs pierced the roof and devastated its interior. Hitler ordered the abandonment of all fixed launch bases in favor of mobile platforms. The remaining equipment was transferred to other factories in central Germany. On the 4th of September, Canadian units seized the site. The Germans had left it behind with the drainage valves open, flooding several sections of the structure. In the days following the capture, the Allies did not understand the true purpose of the building. A technical inspection in 1945 was needed to confirm that it had been a base designed to launch V-2 missiles. In 1951, a Franco-British military commission re-examined the site. They concluded that despite the damage, the structure remained standing and could potentially be repurposed if the water were drained. However, it was never again used for military purposes. Decades later, the land was acquired by private owners. In 1973, it was opened to the public for the first time. It became an open-air museum with walking paths, remnants of weaponry, and marked zones. In 1986, it was declared a historic monument by the French government. Today, the blockhouse d'Eperlec still stands as a concrete colossus frozen in war. It remains scarred by craters, empty tunnels, and the remnants of a plan meant to launch the regime's final weapon from that forest. But it never managed to fire a single missile. Hitler's hat, what a young Jewish soldier found in Munich. In late April of 1945, as Allied troops advanced into the heart of the Third Reich, a small reconnaissance group from the 42nd Infantry Division was assigned to inspect an apartment in Munich. The mission was clear: search for documents or intelligence materials that might be of use. What they found that day, however, had no military value, but would later become a deeply symbolic historical artifact. At the top of a wardrobe, inside a box, a Jewish soldier found a top hat with the initials AH embroidered in the lining. That hat had belonged to Adolf Hitler. The young man who found it was named Richard Marowitz. He was 19 years old, from Brooklyn, and part of the reconnaissance team of the 132nd Regiment. On April 30th, the same day Hitler took his own life in his Berlin bunker, Marowitz was rummaging through the dictator's apartment in Munich. Upon opening a box, he came across the hat. In a mix of revulsion and irony, he threw it to the ground and stomped on it. He had no idea that this act would spark a story that would span decades. That hat, instead of being turned in as evidence, was kept by Marowitz. For the remainder of his time in Europe, he kept it hidden among his belongings. Upon returning to New York, he stored it alongside other memorabilia from his time at the front. For years, the hat remained inside a canvas bag, forgotten among boxes, surrounded by props used for performing magic tricks at children's parties. Not even his children knew the story. Over time, Marowitz began participating in veterans' gatherings and educational events about the Second World War. It was during these meetings, encouraged by fellow veterans, that he decided to share what he had experienced. At one such event, he was asked to bring a keepsake from the war, and he chose to show the hat. The reaction was immediate. What had remained hidden for half a century began to draw attention both nationally and internationally. Years later, with Marowitz already deceased, his children decided to donate the hat to the New York State Military Museum in Saratoga Springs. The object was included in a commemorative exhibition marking 80 years since the liberation of the Dachau concentration camp. There, the 42nd Division, the same one Marowitz belonged to, had liberated more than 30,000 prisoners on the 29th of April, 1945, just one day before the hat was found. During the handover ceremony, Marowitz's children shared how they had discovered the story. They recalled that during their childhood, the hat was simply part of the magic trunk their father used to entertain other children. What they didn't know was that this accessory had once belonged to the man responsible for the most brutal regime of the 20th century, and that their father had found it during one of the war's most symbolic moments. The museum chose to include the hat as part of a broader narrative. It not only represents the physical collapse of the Nazi regime, but also a historical irony that it was a Jewish soldier who took possession of one of the dictator's personal belongings. The museum's director emphasized that it wasn't a luxurious or particularly valuable item, but rather one that carried profound meaning because of who had worn it and who had found it. Since its discovery, the hat has been featured in educational talks, especially in schools. War veterans shared their experiences and used the hat as a visual anchor to speak about Nazism, persecution, war, and memory. Years later, a documentary titled Hitler's Hat was released at film festivals, telling the story of how a seemingly minor object became a symbol of informal justice and personal remembrance. What's most striking is how the item spent decades without any attention, mixed in with household items. While other wartime artifacts were catalogued and archived in museums, this hat lived a near domestic existence, far from display cases or labels. Only when Marowitz was invited to share his story did the object come to light. Today, the hat is protected in a display case at the museum, accompanied by photos of the young soldier, maps of the operation in Munich, and documents related to the liberation of Dachau. There are also testimonies from other members of the Rainbow Division, as the 42nd was known, many of whom took part in the final march into southern Germany. What began as a simple act, stomping on the dictator's hat, became a piece of historical memory. It was not a planned act nor a strategic capture, but rather the spontaneous gesture of a young Jewish man who, without realizing it, left his mark on the symbol of the one who tried to exterminate his people. The intact portrait of Hitler that someone hid before fleeing. During a routine cleanup following a major flood in the German city of Hagen, a history teacher accidentally discovered a cavity behind a deteriorated wall. The discovery occurred in the year 2021. In that space, less than half a meter wide, a newspaper dated 1945 appeared. Upon further excavation, several personal and official items from the Nazi era were uncovered, preserved since the collapse of the Third Reich. Sebastian Yurtseven, the teacher who made the discovery while helping his aunt clean the residence, came across a complete collection of Nazi artifacts deliberately hidden. Among them were a portrait of Hitler, a pistol, gas masks, National Socialist Party plaques, a pair of brass knuckles, swastika insignias, personal letters, and official documents. Everything had been carefully stored behind the wall of the property. The surprise grew as the building's history came to light. During the Nazi era, it served as a local headquarters for the NSV, the regime's welfare organization. Although the teacher's family had purchased the property in the 1960s unaware of its past, evidence suggested that in April of 1945, as Allied forces advanced toward the city, NSV members hurriedly hid these materials, attempting to erase any compromising traces. The director of the Hagen Municipal Archive, Ralph Blank, stated that the objects were hidden during the regime's collapse and remained untouched until their discovery, made possible by the recent flood damage. Some items provide concrete details about how the offices were used. The brass knuckles, for instance, were likely used by Nazi militias in street clashes with communist groups. The swastika plaques and NSV insignias were stored alongside these items in what may have functioned as a symbolic altar or commemorative corner within the main office. Among the materials was also a love letter written in 1905, addressed to a young woman named Hedwig Wiede. Although unrelated to the Nazi period, it was found among the rest of the documents. Archivists identified the recipient in local civil records. She married in 1913, had 2 children, and never contacted the sender again. Beyond the emotional value of certain items, such as personal emblems and photographs, the most significant aspect for experts lies in the official documents. Among these are administrative reports from the NSV, internal correspondence, and typewritten lists. Some papers include handwritten notes that may belong to high-ranking party officials, potentially offering insights into the operational hierarchy of the organization within the Hagen district. So far, researchers have extracted 12 full boxes of materials, currently being examined by the municipal archive team. The volume of documents is so large that staff have been working for over a week on the initial sorting. The goal is to digitize every file and preserve the physical items under stable conservation conditions. For historian Ralph Blank, the find presents a unique opportunity to accurately reconstruct the Nazi administrative networks at the local level. While there are accounts of documents being destroyed in the final days of the regime, it is rare to find an intact and sealed collection in its original state. The building had been the local headquarters of the NSV, whose operations in North Rhine-Westphalia can now be studied using the recovered documents. The NSV was responsible for organizing social assistance programs, running childcare centers, distributing confiscated goods to Aryan families, and promoting party activities. The records found could shed light on how these tasks were carried out, who was involved, and how resources circulated. There is also the possibility of uncovering direct evidence of how confiscated property, particularly furniture, clothing, and household goods, was managed. The use of such spaces as hiding places became common in the final months of the conflict, especially in areas expecting imminent occupation. In this case, the documents were not only hidden quickly, but also with a degree of planning. Everything was packed and concealed behind a false wall, suggesting a coordinated action rather than a hasty abandonment. The archives also preserve details about the symbolic environment surrounding the staff. Some envelopes feature ideological slogans in their headers, and the stamps used bare party emblems. The photographs include portraits in uniform, local parades, and party gatherings, all dated between 1936 and 1944. Discoveries like this not only provide valuable data for academic research, but also offer tangible elements that can be used in educational exhibitions. The Hagen Archive plans to display part of the collection in a temporary exhibit, accompanied by informational panels contextualizing the NSV's role in the Nazi state apparatus. Auschwitz and the 400 objects the Nazis failed to destroy. During the first weeks of excavation, archaeologists uncovered only minor items, a few ceramic fragments, 19th century coins, and a plaque dedicated to a rabbi. But by mid-June of 2004, everything changed. In the exact corner where the great Synagogue of Auschwitz once stood, a buried collection of objects emerged that had remained hidden underground for decades. In total, more than 400 pieces that had once been part of the furnishings and ritual life of the local Jewish community before the war began. An exceptional find that confirmed long-held rumors about a desperate act of preservation in the face of imminent Nazi occupation. The excavations began on the 28th of May and continued until the 29th of June, led by archaeologist Małgorzata Grupa from the Nicolaus Copernicus University of Torun. The work was prompted by testimonies from those who remembered seeing members of the Jewish community hide metal boxes in the foundations of the temple when news of the war's outbreak reached them. One such witness, Yeshayahu Yarot, had survived the Holocaust and, nearly 70 years later, met a young Israeli who was planning to visit the extermination camps. During their conversation, Yarot shared a memory he had carried since 1939. He had seen something being buried near the stairway, leading to the women's gallery in the synagogue. Rabbi Eliyahu Bombach was believed to have ordered the concealment of the most valuable religious objects just as German troops approached the city. In reconstructing the events, archaeologists determined that the burial took place at a depth of 1 meter and that the items had been disassembled before being hidden. Yarrow even drew a sketch of the location to aid in the search. That map became the foundation for the initial probes. However, the first 2 excavated areas yielded no results. It was only when the team expanded the search to the entire foundation perimeter that, in the final week, they located the original hiding place. The discovery included decorative marble elements from the ark that housed the sacred scrolls, ornamental floor tiles, ceremonial plates, charred remains of books, commemorative plaques, bronze lamps for the eternal flame, Hanukkah menorahs, chandeliers from the second half of the 19th century, disassembled furniture, benches, and items with Hebrew inscriptions. Several objects bore signs of having been hastily dismantled. Others, like the burned fragments of religious texts, confirmed that some items had been damaged by fire, either before burial or perhaps as a result of the synagogue's destruction. Among the findings, remnants of fortified structures built by the Nazis within the synagogue's perimeter were also identified, indicating that the site had been altered and likely desecrated during the occupation. The excavation not only allowed for the recovery of this legacy, but also documented, for the first time, the original foundations of the first wooden synagogue erected on that site. The land had recently been returned to the local Jewish community, thanks to the restitution law passed in 1997. The final push came from two Israeli civilians, Yariv Nornberg, the young man who heard Yaro's testimony, and filmmaker Yahali Gat, who documented the entire process in the film A Treasure in Auschwitz. The recovered material was transferred to the Auschwitz Jewish Center in Oswiecim, where it was catalogued, restored, and preserved. Some of the pieces were integrated into the museum's permanent exhibition, including a complete bronze lamp, fragments of menorahs, parts of the original furniture, and marble decorations. The recovery, which lasted 4 weeks, became one of the most significant archaeological excavations related to Jewish heritage hidden during the war. According to other accounts, the Torah scrolls were not buried with the recovered items, but may have been hidden in the city's Jewish cemetery, though this has not been confirmed. The absence of those manuscripts did not diminish the significance of the discovery. The operation was funded by the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany and private donations. Coordination between archaeologists, activists, and survivors was crucial in identifying the exact location, just days before the scheduled deadline for the work. Among the collaborators were Adam Drux and Lolek Lera, former Jewish residents of Oswiecim now living in Israel, who contributed information and support during filming. The Oswiecim treasure not only returned items of great material and spiritual value to the community, but also revealed a deliberate and organized attempt to protect what represented the collective identity of a threatened people. The recovery of these items, many in fragile condition, allowed for a precise reconstruction of aspects of Jewish worship and religious life just before the Nazi occupation began. Each rescued object now serves as a tangible testimony of what was intended to be preserved in the face of imminent danger. The exhibition remains open at the city's Jewish Center and continues to keep alive the names, practices, and spaces that shaped entire generations. It all began with a single remembered moment, a hand-drawn map, a relentless search, and a vanished synagogue that still held underground the remnants of a history halted in 1939. Sobibor, the discovery of the objects the Nazis tried to erase. During excavations at the former Sobibor extermination camp in Poland, a team of archaeologists uncovered the remains of a building where prisoners were forced to undress and have their heads shaved before being led to the gas chambers. Amid the foundations, personal belongings emerged that had remained hidden for decades beneath the wooden floor. These small and fragile items had slipped between the floorboards before the building was destroyed, and the camp was covered with trees in an attempt to erase its existence. Sobibor was one of the main extermination centers operated by the Nazi regime between the spring of 1942 and the fall of 1943. More than 200,000 people were murdered at its facilities. On October 14, 1943, a group of prisoners led an uprising that allowed some inmates to escape. Shortly afterward, Heinrich Himmler ordered the camp closed and completely destroyed. The buildings were razed, the remains removed, and the grounds were planted with trees. For over 6 decades, there were no visible traces of the site. Archaeological excavations began in 2007 under the direction of researchers Yoram Haimi, Wojciech Mazurek, and Ivar Schutte. Their work led to the discovery of the platform where trains carrying deportees arrived, the foundations of the gas chambers, and the areas where prisoners were forced to undress before being executed. It was in this zone, known as the Path to Heaven, that the most revealing objects were unearthed. Beneath the soil, items once carried by the victims in the final moments of their lives came to light. Among them was a necklace with a Star of David, a woman's wristwatch, and a glass amulet depicting Moses holding the tablets of the law. On the back of the amulet was the text of the Shema, a traditional Hebrew prayer. Also found was a small pendant inscribed with the Hebrew words Mazal Tov, the name of God, and 3 stars of David engraved on the back. Archaeologists determined it had belonged to a young girl born on July 3, 1929, in Frankfurt am Main. Though the pendant bore no name, a comparison with Holocaust deportation records suggested a possible identity. According to data from the Holocaust Deportations Database Project led by Joel Zissenwein, a girl named Caroline Cohn, born in Frankfurt on the same day, was deported on November 11, 1941, from her hometown to the Minsk ghetto in Belarus. It is unknown whether she survived the ghetto's conditions, but it is likely that her fate ended in Sobibor, where the last 2,000 inmates from Minsk were transported before the ghetto was closed in 1943. The pendant bears a striking resemblance to another item linked to Anne Frank, who was also born in Frankfurt in 1929. Both girls were German Jews from the same city and year, leading researchers to consider a possible familial connection. While no conclusive evidence exists, it remains an open line of inquiry. In addition to the pendants, archaeologists recovered a metal ring, a wristwatch, and a small pendant made of pebbles. All of these items were found near the foundations of the disinfection building, where Nazis forced prisoners to remove their clothing before being led to mass execution. The objects had become lodged in the floorboard's cracks, concealed for decades and preserved by the soil and vegetation that had been used to erase the history of the site. Remains of the mechanical equipment used to dismantle the camp after the uprising were also found. The discovery of these devices confirmed that the dismantling was methodical, involving specialized machinery and a structured plan. The Nazis left behind no ruins, but rather a site that had been carefully covered over. This attempt at total erasure was partially reversed thanks to forensic archaeology, which allowed for the reconstruction of the camp's topography and the recovery of fragments of a silenced history. All the objects were documented by the Israel Antiquities Authority in collaboration with Yad Vashem. The items became part of the Holocaust Research Archive, and several were publicly displayed in temporary exhibitions. The discovery not only provided material evidence of how the extermination camp functioned, but also created a tangible human connection with the victims. In uncovering these belongings, archaeologists recovered the identity and memory of real individuals who passed through Sobibor in their final hours. The work conducted at the Sobibor site is one of the few archaeological efforts that has successfully documented in detail the extermination process at this specific camp. Most of the buildings were completely demolished and their structures lost. Thanks to the efforts of these researchers, the original layout of the internal pathways and procedures used by Nazi officers could be reconstructed. The personal items became a silent key to understanding the level of organization behind the mass murder system. The pendant, believed to have belonged to Caroline Cohn, is preserved as one of the most symbolic pieces of the discovery. Its inscription, its delicacy, and its potential connection to Anne Frank have turned it into an icon of the excavations. Its appearance enabled a story to be told with names, dates, and individual paths, in contrast to the impersonal scale of genocide. The discovery not only revealed remnants, but also a network of human connections that the Nazis tried to erase, along with the camp's physical structures. Years after the end of the conflict, traces of war continue to surface from deep below. Beneath fields, walls, beaches, or within walls, objects, structures, and documents still lie hidden, either hastily concealed or abandoned amid chaos. Each discovery not only expands the historical record, but also reveals how people lived, fought, and fled during those days. What once seemed buried forever now resurfaces with unexpected clarity. And as experts analyze every recovered piece, a part of the past breathes again, silent yet intact, because although wars end, their traces never fully disappear.